afternoon's panel, where we will be engaging PME alumni in industry. The moderator for this panel will be Dr. Wayne Delker. Dr. Delker received his BS in chemistry. He went on to receive his PhD from Columbia University in 1981. Dr. Delker served as Director of Research and Development for GE Silicones and later as Senior VP of Research and Development and Chief Innovation Officer at Clorox. More recently, he served as the Executive Director of the Fung Institute of Engineering Leadership at UC Berkeley. In this past year, he formed Ventilator SOS, a nonprofit startup whose aim is to supply medical equipment to developing countries to fight the war on COVID. Dr. Delker?
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I also would like to thank you in the audience. I know you have a lot of choices and demands on your time for coming and spending it with us. I think you're going to enjoy over the next hour a really interesting discussion with our panelists. It's a really interesting group of people. I think one of the themes that has emerged throughout today is that PME is a very unique place. First, it was the first school really dedicated to this emerging field of molecular engineering. But even more importantly than that, I think, is this idea that it was built from the ground up with the idea that the best way to have holistic and sustainable solutions to complex world problems is to bring people together, experts together from a variety of different fields, and create an environment where they can work without the traditional boundaries and silos that you might find, and in fact you would find at most universities. I think over the next couple of days, we're all going to see a lot of really important scientific and engineering breakthroughs that came from that approach. But I think in some ways, probably more important than the scientific breakthroughs is the education of the next generation of leaders in molecular engineering. As these folks go out and join companies and develop their career, they're going to be working on problems, bringing to bear what they've learned, and helping really shape this rapidly emerging and really exciting field. So that's what we're going to get into today. We have 5 alums from a variety of different backgrounds that are going to talk to you a little bit about, 1, what they're doing now, 2, their aspirations, where they want to be, say, 5 to 10 years down the road, how PME helped enable them to get there, and then with a little time, we'll talk a little bit about things that they've learned along the way, okay? I would like to start out with a quick poll of the audience. How many of you are currently students? By showing your hand, raise of hands. Okay. How many of you are industry partners? You've worked with PME from an industry perspective? Okay, thank you. Staff and faculty? Okay, so good. It's a nice combination of folks. So with that, I would like you to meet our panelists. We do have Daniel online. Is he? There he is. Daniel, since you just popped up on the screen, I'll start with you. Daniel, unfortunately, wasn't able to join us live, but we welcome you online. Daniel's a software engineer at Google and studied chemical engineering at Oregon State University, where he took an interest in creating educational thermodynamic simulations. This work led him to the University of Chicago, where he completed his PhD work with Professor Juan de Pablo and Professor Nagel, designing metamaterials with unusual mechanical properties. From there, he worked in the semiconductor industry using molecular simulation to improve chip fabrication processes before making his way to Google. Welcome, Daniel. Can you hear us?
Thank you.
Hear us okay? And let's make sure we can hear you okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I didn't realize my head would get to be the biggest.
You are a commanding presence in the room. But welcome. I'm glad you could join us. Next, I'd like to introduce Sam Whiteley. Sam joined HRL in August 2019 as a research staff. For those of you that may not know, HRL Laboratories is recognized as one of the world's premier physical science and engineering research laboratories, serving aerospace, automotive, and consumer products. Sam's current research is at the intersection of process integration, materials science, and devices physics to identify noise sources in silicon, silicon germanium, quantum dots, while improving the device fabrication. Additionally, Sam leads a research team on the manufacturability of thin-film silicon carbide for photonics and quantum networking. Prior to joining HRL, Sam received his PhD in 2019 in physics from the University of Chicago and earned a BS in 2014 in physics from UC San Diego with a specialization in biophysics. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
I'll go next to my next is David Christle. David, indicate who you are. David received a PhD in 2016 in Professor Oswald's lab studying silicon carbide defects for quantum computing. He spent 3 years at LinkedIn on the anti-abuse AI team, using machine learning techniques to fight abuse across a 700 million member platform, which sounds like an incredibly complicated job. He's currently working as a machine learning engineer on the risk team at Cash App, applying machine learning to account security and cryptocurrencies. Welcome, David. Next, I would like to introduce Siqi Meng. Siqi is a research chemist at PPG, where she works with adhesives and sealants. PPG is a market leader in developing paints, coatings, and specialty materials with more than $14 billion in sales over 70 countries. Siqi joined PME PhD program, the PME PhD program in 2017 to study polyelectrolyte complexes with Professor Matt Terrell and graduated in 2021. Before that, she received her BS degree in chemical engineering from Rice University. Welcome.
Thanks.
Next, I'd like to introduce Emre Sevgen. Emre is a molecular engineer with an interest in machine learning who works at the intersection of mathematics, computation, and natural sciences. As a data scientist at Evozyne, Emre works on software development, R&D, and protein engineering projects. Evozyne is a preeminent protein engineering company capable of tackling critical global challenges in medicine, agriculture, the environment, and new materials. Emre received his BS in chemical and biological engineering at the University of Illinois Urbana campus, and then completed his PhD in 2019 in molecular engineering at the University of Chicago, where he conducted research with Professor Hubble and Professor DePablo. So welcome. With that, I would like to talk a little bit about the format today, just so you know. We will start with me asking the panelists some questions to kind of frame our discussion, and then I want to go to you in the audience to give you an opportunity to ask questions yourself. So as we're going through our kind of preliminary discussions here, be thinking about good questions. I should also tell you, since most of you are students, that I do a lot of teaching in both business schools and engineering programs. So I'm very comfortable cold calling on students. So I encourage you to come up with questions. So when I ask, there's not a lot of silence. Okay, well with that, all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. What I would like to do first is pose a general question to the group, which is just tell us what are you doing in your current role and why you're doing it. David, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I am currently a machine learning engineer working for Square on a product that's one of ours called Cash App. Similar to kind of a Venmo type product where we're doing peer-to-peer payments, but we're integrating like a ton of other things into it, buying, selling stocks, sending stocks. Bitcoin is now like a huge product. So I am working on our risk team. So we are chartered with making sure that people's accounts are secure, making sure that people aren't scammed on the platform, making sure that our platform isn't used for things that are against returns of service, all sorts of things. And previously, I worked for 3 years at LinkedIn, as Wayne mentioned, on the anti-abuse AI team, where I did very similar things, but just applied to LinkedIn's platform. I think when I started at LinkedIn, I wondered who would ever abuse LinkedIn. I was like, what can you even do that's wrong? But it is like, I have to say, it's like when you reach a huge scale or your product becomes very popular, it's instantly like a target for people who want to abuse it. They want to create fake accounts, spam, they want to take money out of people's Cash App. It's actually like quite fascinating. So what I do is we try to make machine learning models to detect this. And so any of you who know me from my time at PME, I was like incredibly interested in like data analysis and statistics, and so now I get to actually apply that to very like open problems that like there is no solution for, and it's constantly changing at like a very rapid rate. So it keeps me very interested.
Sounds like an exciting field.
Yeah, it's messy.
Siqi, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure. So as Wayne just introduced, right now I'm working in PPG in the adhesive and sealants group. As he introduced, PPG is a company that mainly works on coatings. So our group is a very special group that we deal with adhesive and sealants related product, which includes, for example, the thermal management material in the battery packs for EV vehicles, and the structural adhesives for vehicles, and also the acoustic coatings to reduces the noise vibrations. So right now my work involves a lot of bench work, same as what I did in PhD. But what's different from PhD is right now, instead of like only focusing on the research itself, I also have a lot of discussions with, for example, product development teams in our company. And occasionally I also collaborate with the lawyers to protect the patents if necessary. And in addition to that, we also have a lot of meetings, much more meetings than I had during PhD. I would say one of the, not complaining.
But it is reality.
Yeah, it is reality. And I would say the biggest change for me since I joined PPG is like right now when I'm driving my car, I would think about like which product is actually coming from our company. Yeah. But so far, I really enjoyed working in the industry setting, and yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, CJ. Daniel, since you're this impending presence in the room, why don't you go next?
Very well. I am unmuted. So I work as an energy algorithms engineer at Nest within Google, and the goal, broadly speaking, is to try to reduce the environmental and monetary impact of heating and cooling your home, which, to be perfectly honest, sorry, I just lost everyone. Can you hear?
We can still hear
Okay,
you.
you're back.
Okay.
You're back. Great. To be perfectly honest, when I first was joining the team, I was not sure that was going to be an interesting topic, but it has ended up being quite engaging. There's a very rich combination of algorithm design, of trying to do interesting optimization techniques, of just software development, and it's a very engaging work culture where basically if you can come up with an idea for some feature and you are able to convince enough people that it is in fact a good idea, then you can basically make it happen. And it's neat to see your ideas manifest in millions of people's homes within the span of like a few months. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I've been there for a couple of years. Yeah,
Great.
it's neat.
We can see your bicycle in the frame. Are you also a big cyclist?
Yeah. The Bay Area is great for cycling, so might as well take advantage of it.
Yeah, saving energy there as well.
That's right.
Why don't you go next?
Oh, yeah. What do I do? I know what I do. I'm on the machine learning end of a very diverse pipeline to design artificial proteins. We do this because we at least believe some of the problems are best addressed by protein engineering. It's not unlike PME, where it's a lot of very diverse disciplines packed into one working tight space, and I really enjoy that. I get to interact with people who know very different things and know very different things very well from me. That's very enjoyable. And from them, I learn new things every day, and from me, I hope they learn new things every day. And through that collaboration, we're breaking new frontiers in protein engineering with artificial intelligence. And we hope to cure some diseases and address some environmental issues along the way. It's been a blast so far.
Oh, great, thank you. Sam, bring us home.
Right, thanks. So I'm Sam Whiteley, and at HRL Laboratories, I wear a lot of different hats. So to give a few examples of what it is that I do there, when you said leading a team on silicon carbide thin films, that's very close to what I was working on in graduate school. And I knew that while interviewing and then as I joined HRL Labs, that there was a opportunity to start or become part of a brand new project where they wanted to explore quantum networks and break into that space. But so with chip integrated photonics. But now I, in industry, got to think about a different facet of the problem. I always knew that the scalability and manufacturability is what we talked about all the time as an advantage of the system in academia, but didn't feel like I could actually solve that problem because I kept having to do just the new, coolest scientific feat. So now I get to actually devote a team and a proportion of my time to just working on what is a good way to make that material that would be possible to make devices, and then actually do that in a larger, wafer scale system, rather than, say, receiving a little chip from a collaborator. And I also get to think about some brand new ideas, exploring, like I've done some RF MEMS, that's very close to home, but like internally funded new ideas. And then a large amount of my time is on silicon quantum dots, where I describe myself probably more as like a Swiss Army knife. I go in and I try to figure out what are some things that we are really not doing right now, but should be doing, because it'll either give us a lot more information. Lately, I've been trying to get a bit more into the topic of yield and production, but earlier on, it was in a bit more circuit modeling and trying to understand what might be other sources of noise from either charge noise or how we've fabricated the device. And yeah, I just like that I get to constantly switch topics and learn about just so many different types of physics, from semiconductors, RF, from lots of different people there.
Sounds like a great role, great job. But one of the things, as an aside, it's kind of one of the things that always impresses me when talking with alumni like you folks, is in a relatively small school of PME, the diversity of talent and what people are doing. As you just heard, a variety of very different assignments and roles. It's really kind of cool. You all are fairly early in your career. So I'd like to, and then my next question is kind of, as you think about the next 5 or 10 years, what are your career aspirations? So where do you want to go? Now let's mix it up. Let's see, let's go to Daniel first. Daniel? People online always get forgotten.
Appreciated. Let's see. I started out my career being very picky about how close to my graduate school work I stayed. So my first role was doing molecular simulation within the semiconductor industry, and that was very interesting. That I learned quickly that there are many interesting things outside of exactly what you did in graduate school. So extending that, I mean, it's hard for me to say, like, this is what I want to be working on in 5 years. I think, broadly speaking, I think the area of trying to do something that engages with people directly and addresses some kind of, addressing environmental problems is always an interesting area to try to end up in. So that would be good. In my current role, of course, as you advance, you try to take on more and more leadership opportunities. So that's always something that I'm trying to look out for. But in general, I'm just trying to keep an open mind to opportunities that may sound unfamiliar. And trying to think of as many new things that we can do within the Nest ecosystem as we can. I mean, within Google, there are all sorts of things you can just go and do. So there's a lot of opportunity
It's
there.
got to be an incredible environment at Google to be able to do things, but it sounds like you're really a constant learner in terms of where you want to go. Thank you. David, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo a little bit about what Daniel said, is that, if you asked me the question about what I want to be in 10 years or where I see myself, I'm like, I think I'm optimizing like with very local optimizations at this moment, where I'm trying to just keep doing the most interesting stuff that like gets me going in the morning. I worked at LinkedIn. I had the opportunity to work on like a crazy number of problems and some like very like high touch, urgent situations. And it's just like so engaging to keep doing that, and where you're using skills that you have and backgrounds that are like quite rare, and these companies all want to hire this type of talent, and you get to do that. So that is kind of what's been kept piquing my interest in the last couple years. I think one thing is I've now in year 4 of working in machine learning is seeing small teams grow larger, and things that didn't exist, like teams or even parts of your product that maybe you've even like worked on that now exist in the real world and can outlive you in some way. And I think that's also happened in somewhat in grad school too. I think maybe like really long term, not thinking about this now, so really long term is like 5 to 10 years for me. I'm interested in how could I take part in like growing like a high performance team in machine learning? Like I don't see this field, dying down. It's only going to become bigger. So that means everything's going to scale up. And how do you get that magic of really good people in one place that have enough freedom to kind of pursue things and get things done without it becoming, a little bit too bogged down in bureaucracy, things like that.
It sounds like leadership is definitely in your future.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Siqi, what about you? What do you see in the future?
To be honest, this is a really hard question for me because I've only been in the industry for a little more than 5 months now. This is the question I've been asking myself from my day 1 in PPG, and I still doesn't have a definite answer for that. But one thing I'm very sure about is I want to be a constant learner, to always learn new things and to see where I can contribute in the field and in the industry. So I would say 10 years is really long, but in 5 years or maybe a little bit less than 5 years, my goal is to figure out which track I want to go. For example, in our company, we have a leadership track or a more research track. I would like to figure out which track I'm more comfortable in, and also to understand the industry field better, to see where I can contribute in the long run, and also keep an open mind, and just to be an open.
That's a big decision, and we all go through it. So good luck with that. Ray, how about you?
At the risk of sounding boring, I'm going to echo some sentiments here again. But it's hard to, I agree with everyone in that it's very hard to predict. Probably 10, 15 years ago, I would have thought I would have been a chemical engineer. Then I thought I was going to be an immunologist. Then I thought I would do MD for the rest of my life. And now I'm not doing any of those things. So I keep learning and discovering cool things, and that leads me down a path. And I think I'm in a better place now than any of my predictions, so that's worked out for me so far.
That's great.
One thing I'd probably actively seek out, though, is I've really enjoyed mentorship in here, the few opportunities I got, and maybe the one downside to a really exciting startup is that everyone's basically at the same level, and everyone's very busy setting up everything all the time. Yeah. As we grow, it'd be nice to maybe head up a technical team, or at least have some people to pass on knowledge to if I acquire it in the process.
Great. You can see a kind of a theme emerging here. How about you, Sam?
Well, I might be in line with that theme, but I'll start off with the 10-year answer, and it might be a little disappointing. But so I just like to work on currently trying to work on new technologies I like working in the really more fundamental science, early research phase, and things that have a lot of promise and really interesting applications. So quantum computing falls under that, and I could see myself staying with that for a long time. But yeah, where it goes, or maybe if what company I go with it, I don't think that's possible to know, or like I don't even know what I want to do exactly in 10 years. In 5 years, I would probably like to be a technical manager of sorts. At least that's what I think right now, because my favorite parts while working are trying to develop our scientific roadmaps and visions, help come up with, once there is maybe a more overarching idea or that application, is how are we going to get there? How are we going to engineer the final device? So you have to come up with that idea, and then even the harder part is how are you going to do that? And what are the points along the way? But I might find that I don't like management and would be happier being an individual contributor or just staying on a scientist track. So say that's also possibilities. And yeah, we could get into what technical management versus operational or program management means. Started to discover that what all of these different things are in industry that just
Right.
did not know about before.
Yeah, I think the theme that's emerging is you all want to be constant learners and flexible and adaptable, taking opportunities as they come up and not try to predict everything. That's really great. My next question I'm going to pose to the group, so anyone can answer and jump in, but how did PME prepare you for your professional success?
I can take that.
David, jump in.
Yeah. I came to PME in 2013, and it was a lot smaller back then. And it is a little bit more like, everything just felt way more nascent. Nothing is quite built up. It's like, we didn't have a new building, lived in like a basement temporary lab. I think seeing something that's growing like that is incredibly valuable. And I think that students at PME have some really excellent opportunities that are not widespread. And what I mean by that is, like when you look at industry partnerships, or we have the partnerships with Argonne, or you have Polsky Center. These are like little ribbons out into the rest of the world, and this is how you see how things are actually built in the real world. I wouldn't trade my time in the lab for anything, but it is so incredibly valuable to just get like little glimpses of that, because when you graduate, like that is how things kind of get built in like larger organizations. And so that's something you don't really see in the classroom, and by being in PME, you have the opportunity, if you should choose to do so, to at least touch some of those kind of external, you get a view into the external world.
It allows you to get a breadth of view that you don't get normally in some places.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to build on that with your own personal experiences?
Speaking of breadth, I can add to that. At the start, as I mentioned, I thought I would become an immunologist, mostly due to Elise Watkins, who's probably speaking upstairs right now. Brilliant person. But when I came, I was surrounded by people who were interested in like quantum stuff and then immunology and a variety of things. I wasn't sure what I was interested in, but I figured immunology was really cool. Took immunology, which ended up on the foolish side of the foolish/brave divide, but I've learned a lot. And then later on, when I decided to pivot completely and I thought I was going to do machine learning, which is what I am doing, there was a home for me here still. I didn't have to change departments or move anywhere. We were all still together, but now all of that knowledge I'd acquired, I get to apply to my current job, plus all the things I've learned when I decide to pivot, and all of that is kind of possible because within that like initial 2025 batch, there was this wide breadth of people that I could learn from, and I still use those things to this day.
It's a great skill. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think like as maybe like every PhD student can get from their grad school, like PME definitely prepares me with or equip me with the professional knowledge I'm gonna use in my future career. And more than that, I've learned, like, for example, how to learn new knowledge and how to contribute to produce new knowledge. And I feel like the interdisciplinary nature of PME really helps me to learn how to communicate with people with different backgrounds. For example, like we've been to a lot of seminars. For me, I am a polymer scientist by training, but in PME, I've been to a lot of different seminars in quantum engineering and immunoengineering and stuff like that. It's really hard for me to understand what they're talking about at the beginning, to be honest. But like as time goes by and as I've attending more and more seminars, I find it easier and easier for me to understand a different field, and this really helps me to learn new knowledge in my new career. Like even if when I'm learning a completely new different field, I can like still know the way to learn. And also I've been working with, as an experimentalist, I've been collaborating with theorists and computational scientists, and it also like kind of helps me to learn how to communicate with people with different technical skills, like how to achieve mutual understanding and how to make achievements. Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Daniel, I'm going to just pause to let you in if you want. I know it's hard to break
Thanks.
online.
Yeah, I would agree with what a lot of people have been saying. During my PhD, I had the fortune to work on a bunch of different projects and collaborate with like 3 different groups, which at the time was, I mean, it was more stressful than probably just working on one focused project, but I think it gives one a lot of good practice being a fish out of water and just having to adapt and either appear or be competent in as little time as possible. And I think it also just helps to plant the seed of, hey, there are lots of interesting things I could go work on. I don't need to be tied to exactly one area. And I also think just the extent to which a lot of the projects were very open-ended gave really good practice for the sorts of things that I've been faced with in industry. Like, nobody comes to you with, I would like you to perform a certain task, please do so. That kind of labor is cheap. You are tasked with solving very ambiguous problems, and they're ambiguous because no one has bothered to handle them yet.
Yeah, exactly. Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments? Sam?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Actually, that's a really good point, leads into what I was going to say, is that we need to be able to give people at work open-ended problems because you haven't thought through all of it. If you had thought through all of it, you would have spent a lot of your time actually working on it. So it's important to be able to give open-ended problems and know how to take those and work on them. That's part of the training that a PhD gives. PME is really unique because PME labs do very good science, but do try to have this more application focus in mind as trying to be an engineering department. So that is in and of itself good preparation for industry. Am I allowed to also say something that it didn't prepare me well enough for?
You are allowed to say anything you'd like. We'd love to hear what your suggestions might be.
Yeah, it was, Wayne and I were talking about earlier today on our way over here, is that I only discovered after getting into industry that in order to pitch ideas, you have to think about what is the end user of an application. So you have an idea for something, or you have an idea about the application, but you need maybe the technology and the use case, what means in mind, and the use is also, you have to think about what is the end user. And then after you've answered those questions, they want to know how is what you do better than all the other competition. So you also have to know what everybody else does, even if this is a brand new topic to you. And why is yours going to be, say, 10 times better? So that's really hard. I don't remember any class or even anything in lab training for us to think that way. But the more practice you can have to try to tackle all of those parts, really, the more successful you'll be with coming up with new practical ideas.
Yeah, it was one of the earlier talks today where the person talked about the risk of defining everything through a technical lens and not really understanding who the user is and what their needs are. I think it's a really good insight that I think the faculty and staff will take to heart.
Whenever someone tries to propose a new idea, one of the first things that gets brought up is, what is the impact of this feature on the user base, and what is the benefit of that relative to the work that we think will be involved? And as I think everyone is saying, just viewing things through that lens is very useful.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. And that is probably a bigger difference between the university environment and industry. Many of you have touched on my next question already, so we won't spend a lot of time here. But are there any very specific non-technical skills or capabilities that you feel you developed while you were here at PME that's helped you in your career? Anyone? Sam?
Yeah, I'll start off. I think that the PME actually was really good for developing soft skills for me. I enjoyed collaborating with people at Argonne National Lab, at the synchrotron for doing X-ray science, working in the clean room, also having to work with peers in the lab and do experiments, even go to other professors to learn how do we characterize the devices. So yeah, that was a great training to have to communicate with so many different people from various backgrounds.
Excellent, great example. Anyone else have anything they'd like to bring in to the discussion?
Sure, yeah, I can go next. Same thing about like communication is incredibly important. And I think this idea of bringing people from different disciplines together is, that's at the PME, is reflective of what it's like in the real world. All the people that I work with are very similar to me in certain ways and very different from me in other ways. My manager is PhD in theoretical chemistry. My second manager is in like high energy physics. Third manager, it's in like density functional theory. I mean, there's just like so many people that are out there that have like incredibly technical backgrounds, but then other people that I work with that come from like areas of the government, or they come from places where they're not thinking about what a 95% confidence interval really means and why we should care about that. Well, when you're dealing with like risk at a company, and I'm trying to explain to like somebody on our legal team why we need to care about a 95% confidence interval lower bound, like this is a way to like quantify risk, and like you need to be around and able to explain that. And so I think like any exposure that you can get to like people who are thinking in different ways and learning how to like communicate technical ideas to people who are very technical, but also people who are like skilled in other things but not technical in the same ways, is like incredibly valuable. And so yeah, and one other thing that I'll just say, like just broadly about PME, is I think there's a combination of like freedom that we had here in our like scientific research, and also I think just the like high quality like skepticism. So that is kind of a technical thing, but I'm working in the Bay Area in technology, and a bunch of us are, so you have to cut through the hype, and being able to do that because of your background is really good, and communicate that.
Excellent. Anyone else?
And more specifically, I think practice giving really clear, direct, and persuasive presentations is probably one of the fastest ways to convince a group of people that what you are doing is reasonable. That and writing clear, persuasive technical documents. Those have been, in my experience, some of the best ways to evangelize your ideas.
Very good. Great point. It's all about sometimes influencing and selling. even though it's not all about the technology. Anyone else want to jump in on that one, Siqi?
Yeah, I want to add a little bit on what Daniel just said about the soft skills, the presentation skills he developed. For me, I was involved in a outreach program by PME. It's called, I forgot what it's called, but it's basically, you did a volunteer role as a, like the ultimate goal for the project is to deliver a scientific course for primary school students and middle school students, that outreach activity. To be honest, at the beginning I did that outreach is to get a teaching credit so that I don't have to be a TA for another course. And it's a 2-year program, and at the beginning I complained a lot because I feel like, why do we need a 2-year program to just deliver a course to middle school students? But in the end, as we do a lot of workshops, and they train us like on how to talk about your scientific project to the general audience, to people who doesn't have any scientific backgrounds, and this really like helps me to improve my communication skills, improve my presentation skills, like how you can tailor your content of presentation based on your audience group. And I think that really helps me a lot. And right now when I'm doing presentations in an industry setting, I would like, beforehand I would think about more about the scientific content, but now I would think about the audience first, yeah. Who the targeting audience is, and what's the information that is most interesting to them.
That's a great story. That must have been an incredible experience. Anyone else want a piece of this, or should we move on?
I'll add a tiny bit to the earlier point about collaboration and communication. Something that is in between a soft skill and maybe a hard skill is the effectively collaborating with diverse technical skill sets. Initially, I thought if you were working on an interdisciplinary project, you obviously have to know everything about everything in the entire breadth. Turns out that's not feasible, at least for me. Maybe some people are
pretty
smarter.
much nobody.
Yeah. And then the counterpart to that is, this is my silo. I know everything in this like square, and then the other person's square ends here. Turns out you can't communicate if you don't know anything about like the outside of your expertise. So something I picked up here and I've been honing since is that just how much base you need to build in the other disciplines so you can effectively communicate and the collaboration works without attempting to master everything in another bucket, because infeasible and time limiting.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's all about how you manage at the interface of those things, of those other areas. Since obviously a lot of our audience are students, I'd like to ask you about, as you reflect back on your time you spent at PME and from your perspective today, is there anything you would have done differently, or any advice you would give these students of things that they really want to do to maximize their experience at PME?
I can go.
Sure, Dave.
Yeah, just like those, you know, if you have interests in entrepreneurship, you know, you should just at least try to explore some of these little opportunities, these like connections that are being made to the outside world. If I were trying to give myself advice about at least going into machine learning, I mean, that's what I'm kind of familiar with. I felt like it was really hard to interview because you don't know the, like, I don't know, lingo that's used in there. Like, you have all the skills that are necessary to be successful because you can just figure things out. It's the same kind of stuff that you had to do in grad school, but you don't really understand like the language that's used, and so it's kind of hard to interface with people when you're trying to find a job. And one thing that I would maybe recommend, although I'm trying to think if I went back in time and told myself this, whether I would take my own advice, and I don't know if that's true, is you know, doing some kind of like 3-month internship, maybe in like at a company that I wanted to work, or you know, in a field that I wanted to work at, you know, doing some kind of machine learning, data science internship. I don't know how compatible that is with like the way that research works, which is just this very long thing, and you need to have like a lot of control, and you just really need to be in the lab a lot of times. So, you know, if you can figure out some way to like detach for that for just a very like bite-sized part of time, to like go out and work with people that like aren't really working on what you're working on, and it's like pretty different, but like it's still technical, and like you're gonna meet people, you're gonna develop those relationships, learn that lingo. Like I feel like that would be really valuable. But on the other hand, like I really valued my time in the lab and like getting that deep thinking opportunity, which I don't think is something that many people on the world have the opportunity to do.
It's a great example. Emre,
I'll
you
just-
something.
I did exactly that, and it was great. So I'll, if you can do it.
The voice of experience, it works.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad.
Before we move on to it, Daniel, jump in.
Yeah, I guess one thing that, you know, I don't know how broad this is, but I felt like when I started on a new project, I needed to have results like as soon as possible. And I think that sometimes led me down a path of starting to act before having given myself enough time to fully think through and research the problem. And I think one useful thing that I try to do with varying degrees of success now is just give myself permission to not have anything to show for a while. You're learning about the problem space, and you're trying to pick the best course of action before you just dive in. And I think that could have saved some time.
That's a great point. That's incredibly important, giving yourself some soak time before you jump to action. Anyone else with comments or suggestions? Sam?
Yeah, I don't really know if I would have done anything differently in grad school, but with stuff that I've learned recently, what I wish I could have gone back to, like take current skills, would be, well, this probably sounds a bit boring, but like there are a lot of meetings, and they often use the words like risk, action items, milestones, deliverables, and
Talking my
these-
language.
OKRs. Yeah.
these didn't these weren't really used in academic lab setting, but actually it is really useful to constantly be thinking about what are the risks to the project, how could we be more efficient about getting ourselves to the end goal. And so if I think I had like actually for different ideas, I had written out all of my risks. Like for example, now right now one that is probably the most common risk to our projects at HRL is just not hiring enough people and not having enough resources to do these ideas. So you list out all of those risks, and then try to find ways of actually mitigating those by like, is there another very quick experiment that I could have done to just learn why this little thing would have tanked or the project or worked. Right. And I think that would have actually saved a lot of time and led to even more successful projects.
Yeah, it's almost this agile thinking of what is the fastest, cheapest thing I can do to learn the critical thing I need to learn. That's
I agree, and I still probably don't decide on the quickest way of doing things.
Okay, now we're at the point in the discussion where I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. I'm gathering you're going to have to come up to the microphone here. Is that right, or can we actually move the mic around? Moving around, that's a lot easier. So just raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. Up here on the right.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up to the last question. Am I pronouncing it right?
That's completely fine.
Sorry.
Right.
You said you did a short experience, sort of like David mentioned. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah,
and how that was.
of course. I went to IBM for 4 months. I was then just getting interested in machine learning, and just starting to apply it to my research. I picked up some things, and then IBM was completely divorced from my research work. It was pure neural network research in a completely different field, and I cannot describe just how much I learned in those 4 months, and that set me up for everything that followed after. Is that enough detail? It was just... Great, yeah.
It's an important
very
learning
valuable.
Sometimes people think about for internships, they want to do something that's really related to what they're doing on for their research. Sometimes it's better to do things that's totally different, and you get to see the same things through different eyes and a different perspective, so that can be really valuable. Another question back here, I think.
Hi, it's a question to pretty much everyone. I was just thinking, typically in the context of industries, I see that there is an implied gap when it comes to moving towards the role of, research scientist, as opposed to management, where typically more so often than not, there are more roles and more promotions, so as to say. So if one were to check, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, if you're looking for how far can you go in terms of not necessarily salary, I'm not counting that out, but more importantly, if you're talking about career trajectory so that you can have a stable career life, so as to say, what aspect do you think allows opportunity for growth more? Going more towards technical management, or is it going to be just being technical if you are technical as a person? Or do you think there should be some allowance for even technical people to be willing to branch out to going into management?
Yeah, I'd like to take a first stab at answering that question. So a quick answer, though, is that we actually hire a majority of people are PhDs into technical roles and straight into staff scientists or staff engineers. There's not actually any big distinction between them. And as far as promotions, I wouldn't say there's actually any that many fewer. There may be fewer titles overall, but that there's we have staff scientist, senior scientist, principal, and there's maybe a few more just at the company numbers in there that are kind of arbitrary. That's not even my motivation. One type of way that works really well is just I treat any time I get a new responsibility on another project, that feels internal to me like a promotion, but it is not really at the company. And as far as salary, I believe it's possible to you can go very far on just the individual contributor and scientist role, and not a big difference in versus management, unless you start to consider very high up levels of management. And it's from the decades ago industry stereotype or paradigm from the 60s onwards that you would be a scientist and then they would separate people into a management track, and then people would be on a separate track and the management would finally get to run things. There's perhaps still a holdover of those ideas today, but hopefully some people here could comment more.
There's a lot more crossover.
Yeah.
Old days where there were David or Daniel?
Yeah, I would echo that. So it depends completely on the company that you're in. At Google, for example, the goal is for going into management not to be a promotion. It's simply a different a different task. The individual contributor ladder goes up, I believe, it goes up just as far as the management one. There was a similar thing at Applied Materials, where I used to work in the semiconductor industry, though I think there was a slightly more of a focus on management. So it depends, but you can definitely find companies where the individual contributor is valued.
Yeah. Very good. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'll add to that. I think for PPG, there is for each management title, there will be a comparable or equivalent title for the scientists, and the salary is comparable too. And also, once you jump into a track, it doesn't mean you have to stay with that for the entire of your life. You can jump back and forth. For example, I have a lot of colleagues who was planning to be a manager at the beginning of their career, but then as their, for example, personality changes or their family changes, or for example, they have a kids to raise and they want to spend more time on their family, they would jump back to the scientific role. It's definitely very flexible. I would feel like it's more of a personal choice, and it depends both on your family on how comfortable you are in your position, and also on like how achieved you can feel on your job. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much.
And I think there's one more slight distinction between having a formal management role, which is just a different career track, and just trying to have more impact. An individual contributor can have an unbounded amount of impact if you create tools or techniques that everyone else uses. And that's not a formal management role, but as you move up, the bar of your impact is supposed to increase.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how its impact now is not just hierarchical where you are, it's the value you bring to the company and the impact you make that's really important.
I just want to acknowledge the problem and add a contrast that I was at a place that basically only had a management track, and it became a deal breaker. So at least I've run into this problem at least once. It is not. It's not the best.
Right.
So.
And the talent migrated away.
I was going to say, and you did the right thing, you left. Other questions? Who's got the mic? Let's go down here. We'll go to the left side of the room.
So we've been talking a lot about what you wished PME taught you in your industrial life. I want to kind of twist that question a little bit, and I'm wondering, what did you learn in the industry that you think could benefit research? And Sam was talking a little bit about this, but if you could just muse a little bit about that, and do you think it is also, are there any dangers to be so focused with a goal such that you might miss certain things in research? And how do you think research should be done now, having the perspective of coming from the industry?
Yeah, what I was saying before was that I wish I had a bit more of a mindset to look at risks of projects. And I just want to, I'll answer your question by giving a concrete example of that applies much more to like the quantum and semiconductor engineering in the room, is that I didn't know of a thing called a process control monitor, or nicknamed a PCM. And these exist all over in semiconductor manufacturing. And it's just a simple device that tests one part of your process. Or it doesn't even have to be a device. It's just something else that you image or do metrology, you measure. And sometimes then more of your wafer and more of what you do is actually taken up with these PCMs to be able to diagnose and even stop things before they've gone wrong rather than waiting all the way to the end. So actually taking all of that philosophy and having put it into academic research would have, I think, just sped up that research a lot.
Great example. Next question. Who's got our microphone? Just go over here. We got two right together, so it's going to be easy for you. Right there, right by you.
Have you at one time debate between going into industry or academia? And if so, what is the final thing that make you decide to go to the industry?
Great question. Who wants to take that one on, guys?
Nope.
I'll take that.
David, you got it.
Yeah, I can
Start
take
us
that.
off.
Yeah, so you know, academia is in doing research is awesome, and that was like the thing that I didn't want to leave behind, you know, going into industry, and I just felt, you know, kind of scared that it's like, oh, you're gonna have people telling you what to do, and like, you know, you're just not gonna have the like kind of freedom that you have now, and so that was something that I really hesitated with going into industry. You know, look for roles that match what you want to keep out of academia. As to why, you know, like what I, you know, shied away from in going into academia is that, you know, I liked being at the bench, and you know, we said like, oh, you're gonna go into leadership, and I'm like, I don't know, I feel like they got to rip me away from the bench because I don't want to leave it, and I felt like, you know, postdoc would have been really, really great. I would have really enjoyed that type of research, but you know, you're all familiar with it. Like you kind of, it seems like you have to kind of move away from that a little bit. You have to start thinking about grants and other things, and I'm not so good at that. And so I kind of sought out, like, well, what could I do where I'm working on really interesting problems and kind of keep that going. And also, it was kind of a more of like a early childhood kind of decision even. Like I'd read about like Silicon Valley, like when I was like a kid. I used to hang out in like these things called like Internet Relay Chat and like talk to like distributed computing engineers when I was like 12. Not about that because I wasn't smart enough for that, but so it's kind of also like a personal thing. So I would say like either way, it's something that is hard for I can't prescribe to you what you should do, but yeah, just kind of balance all of those things, and you have to kind of just jump in and see what happens.
Yeah, I thought it was a very difficult decision between doing a postdoc and then even like delaying the decision of academia versus industry to stay in research. I decided to apply to industrial jobs first just to see what is available. The best way to learn what is out there is to talk to them and interview with them. They'll tell you more about what they do. And it was also appealing to learn an entirely new but maybe kind of related field in a postdoc. And what decided for me was just the promise of getting to work on really hard problems that are part of this large, cohesive effort. And I thought that would give me a sense of feeling like the work we were doing is really meaningful if I was a part of a much larger project. That was what led me to industry.
Great. I think we're almost out of time, but there was one more question I'd like to get to.
Thank you. So I have this question, another personal choice one. So some of you are from those big name companies such as Daniel from Google and Siqi is working in PPG. Some other of you are working in those very brilliant, promising startup, and some of you even have like experience in both kind of companies. So how did you make that decision to work in like big or small companies?
Great question.
For me, I think this decision is not hard for me because I like more stable job, and I like the resources that big company can provide. So to be honest, I've never considered joining a startup. That might be an option as my career is moving along in the future. But like as a new person in the industry, I would prefer to join a big company because I really like the trainings and resources big companies can provide me, and yeah.
Would any of you from smaller companies, there are smaller companies, want to take a crack at that?
Yeah. Upon graduation, I had two choices, which was startup craziness and steady, established place. And at that time, I was in a position in my life where taking a risk like that would have been, it was only going to get riskier from graduation. So thought better, if I'm going to do this at some point in my life, better do it early. And I'll also add that it turns out, unless the startup is very small, it's not, I don't consider it as risky that as everyone makes it out to be. You usually have a pretty clear view of where the startup is headed the next 6 months to a year. You can plan around if things are going bad, you can plan around it. If things are going great, you can plan around it. So it's not like every day you wake up and then you don't know if you're going to have a job or not.
Very good. Yeah, right. Very good. Well, I wish we had more time to go on because this has been a great discussion. I'd like to thank both our panelists for taking your time, but also the audience. You guys did a great job coming up with questions. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists. I think many of us are going to be around for the rest of the day. So if you have other questions we didn't get to, there's plenty of opportunity. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.